Oh, this does.
That's it. Do your introduction as councillor.
Oh, hello. So welcome everybody to our first online Ladywood Ward Forum meeting, specifically to discuss the clean air zone, which will start off on the 1st of June and is of particular importance to the people of Ladywood Ward and to the rest of the city, but especially for us. I think we really thought we'd be meeting live long before now. We are always the optimists in Ladywood Ward. Unfortunately, the COVID virus has got in our way. However, let's hope we get back to full, proper live meetings soon. So I'm here really just to welcome you, obviously, and thank you for your questions if you've sent them in, to tell you that you can, on the chat line, you can send in questions as the meeting goes along. The meeting will be recorded. That's been made clear, but I'm here to remind you again, as we would do it at a full, proper live Ward Forum meeting. I'll also say that Ladywood Ward residents will get priority if there is like a huge number of questions, and we'll be trying to merge the questions where they actually ask about this, the same or a similar aspect of the clean air zone. So I will ask Stephen Arnold from our clean air zone team to lead off, just to tell us all, remind us and to tell everybody else what the clean air zone is, why we're having it, and how it's going to affect us, if at all. In some cases it will affect us all because our air will be cleaner. Steve.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hartley, and Councillor Bohr as well, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody this evening. So before we, what I'd like to do is run through a short presentation, relatively short presentation, that, as Councillor Hartley talked about, just sets out why we believe that we need a clean air zone, and how the scheme will operate, some of the support that's been put in place to help the transition to the clean air zone, but also how the clean air zone sits within a much bigger picture as well, that's part of a wider transport plan, and also part of the council's desire to get to net carbon neutral by 2030. So it's important to put it into that sort of context as well. So I will share my screen, just if I can. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen, so I'll go into presentation mode. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So my name's Stephen Arnold. I'm the head of Clean Air Zone for Birmingham City Council. My job is to support the is to oversee the overall delivery of the Clean Air Zone programme, and there's a number of other work streams that fit into that, and also I have responsibility for the operation of the Clean Air Zone once it's live as well. So so there's a team of people that work for me, and we share responsibilities for these sorts of sessions. So the first thing to emphasise is that the reason that we're introducing the clean air zone is because of the impact of poor air quality. Up to at least 900 deaths are caused every year in Birmingham through poor air quality, and people's lives are shortened as a result of poor air quality. It's also important to note as well that poor air quality disproportionately impacts the young, the old, and people living in deprivation. And if anybody's seen the news today, the coroner's recently ruled on the Deborah Kissy case, which was a really, really tragic case where a young girl with chronic asthma, his death has been directly attributed to the impact of poor air quality. So it remains, despite COVID, it remains the single biggest environmental public health risk that we have in the country, and we need to do something about it. But that's where the Clean Air Zone comes in for Birmingham. The Clean Air Zone programme is being rolled out across the whole of England, And you may have already seen that Bath introduced a charging clean air zone on March the 15th. Other cities will follow after Birmingham. Portsmouth is expected to be next. Bristol will introduce a clean air zone. There'll be a clean air zone introduced in Greater Manchester, so that's not just the centre of Manchester, but the whole of that area. Sheffield's also expected to introduce a clean air zone. So a number of other cities are all seeking to address the issue of poor air quality in their area. And a lot of them are using clean air zones as one of the really critical tools to do that. There's two types of clean air zones that have been set out within the guidance from the government around how clean air zones should operate. There's a non-charging clean air zone. At the moment, the only place that has a non-charging clean air zone is York. That was introduced, I think, at the beginning of this year or last year. But everybody else is introducing a chargeable clean air zone, and there's 4 different levels of chargeable clean air zone. Birmingham needs to introduce a type D clean air zone, so that it includes all types of road traffic apart from motorcycles. Bath has introduced a type C. Bristol will be introducing a type D, but the key point to emphasize here is that the determination about the type of chargeable clean air zone that's introduced is based on local need. For Birmingham, we need a type D clean air zone just because of the sheer volume of traffic that we deal with in the city. During March, through the automatic number plate cameras that we've got, and they're under test at the moment, we recorded close to 8 million vehicle movements during that month. And that is at a point at which the volume of traffic is around about 70% of pre-COVID levels. So that's a really significant challenge. And road traffic is the single biggest contributor to the problem with air quality that we've got, and that's nitrogen dioxide. That's the pollutant where we have levels above the legal limit at quite a high number of locations within the city centre. So the clean air zone will be live from the 1st of June. As I said, it's a type D clean air zone. There's 2 levels of charges, £8 for cars, taxis and vans, and £50 for HGVs, coaches and buses. There was a consultation back in 2018, and we put out a range of potential costs. By comparison, London's ultra low emission zone, which came into operation in April 2019, charges £12.50 per day. So we've based on the feedback that we had to the consultation, we've tried to set the charging regime as low as we possibly could, but also a charge is in place to encourage people to do something different, to avoid the clean air zone or to upgrade the vehicles. It's also important to stress that all of the revenue generated from the clean air zone has to, by law, be reinvested into transport related projects and priorities. And we've already started to work on some of the areas where we think that money could be reinvested, and those include controlled parking zones, where and these are specifically to help mitigate the localized impacts from the clean air zone. Funding for a hydrogen bus pilot, so we've procured 20 hydrogen buses. Those will be rolled out by or operated by National Express West Midlands, part and parcel of trying to encourage change within the transport network. City centre pedestrianisation and public realm, and also additional bus priority walking, cycling schemes, investment in rail stations as well, all part and parcel of helping to upgrade the public transport network, but also encourage people to do something different through active travel schemes, because that is where we see some of the benefits arising from this as well. In terms of some of the support that's been put in place ahead of the introduction of the clean air zone, the first thing to stress is that there's a series of short-term exemptions. The longest short-term exemption that will be in place is for residents within the clean air zone, so that's up to 2 years from the 1st of June. We've already got a really good volume of people applying for that exemption, and the other exemption is for 12 months from the beginning of the clean air zone, and the big one there is for individuals who travel into the clean air zone for work and earn less than £30,000. The other important one to stress is an exemption for visitors to a couple of the medical centres within the clean air zone, and the children's hospital. We've also been working closely with the NHS about a temporary exemption for the mass vaccination centre at Millennium Point. We've listened to a lot of the feedback that we had from people, and we recognise some of the challenges around that, and we don't want people to be deterred from getting a vaccine by the charge. So we've worked and introduced a short-term exemption to support that as well. The key thing with all of the exemptions and the charge is that they only apply, they're only relevant if you have a vehicle that does not meet the emission targets. The emission targets for the clean air zone. So that's Euro 4 for petrol or better, or Euro 6 or better for diesels. And that's why we encourage everybody to visit the online vehicle checker to find out whether or not they need to pay the daily fee, and then think about what support they may be able to apply for. Or if there's something else that they can do in terms of trying to avoid the clean air zone. There are also permanent exemptions that are being put in place. I think the key things to stress with this one are the permanent exemption for vehicles with disabled or disabled passenger tax class. There's also a permanent exemption in place for community and school transport vehicles, and there's also a permanent exemption in place for emergency vehicles. So again, it's recognising that certain classes of vehicles that may be either difficult to modify or adapt to the emission standards of the clean air zone, or have a special requirement, will receive an ongoing and permanent exemption. A lot of those are set down by legislation within the Transport Act that we're using to shape the charging order for this, but it's important that that support's in place. The other area of support is financial. We bid for well, more than £35 billion actually from the government, but we were granted £35 million in grants, and that's broadly split between a vehicle scrappage scheme and travel credits. That's around about £10 million. That's designed to support people working within the clean air zone, earning less than £30,000. There's an upgrade and replace programme for SMEs in the West Midlands, with HGVs and coaches. And then there's also a £15 million package. Again, it's an upgrade and replace programme for Birmingham licensed Hackney carriage and private hire drivers. Both of those, all of those are open for full applications or expressions of interest, and we are actively processing those and handing out grants. For instance, with the taxi scheme, we are just about to hand out, I think we're just about to break the £1.5 million barrier as an important milestone. So we're getting through those as quickly as we possibly can. As I said earlier, the clean air zone is part of a much bigger picture of how the city is trying to change its relationship with the car. You know, it is fair to say that the city was rebuilt back in the 50s and 60s to support cars. You know, we have a motorway that runs through the centre of the city, but over time there is a negative impact from that in terms of air quality and other issues as well. So through the draft transport plan, there's a much greater focus on the movement of people rather than movement of vehicles, and within that we've set out 4 big moves that are intended to help transform again the way we move around the city. So the reallocation of road space, transforming the city centre, prioritising active travel, and also managing demand. And the clean air zone is seen as a really important enabler to help make some of those changes possible. It's not the only thing. There will be other things that come along, but again, it's much greater emphasis on the movement of people rather than vehicles. I think the final thing to add, really, before I open the floor for questions, is as I said at the beginning, is the clean air zone is also an enabler for a longer term future where we're carbon neutral as a city, and that's a really tough challenge. But again, road traffic and transport is one of the biggest contributors that we have to the challenges around that. So it's important that we try and set out a road to reducing the reliance on motor vehicles as early as we possibly can. So the Clean Air Zone is supporting some additional things, such as the purchase of hydrogen buses that I talked about before. It's also supporting an expansion of the city's electric vehicle charging point. At the moment, we're gearing up to roll out around about 400 fast and rapid electric vehicle charging points in a number of places around the city. Those will form the basis of a much bigger network that could have up to 9,000 charging points. But that initial goal with the 400 is to roll out those charging points by the end of 2022. And as part of that as well, the electrification, if you like, of the transport network, we're also looking to roll out a program of 50 electric Hackney carriages that will be on a basis of almost like a rent-to-buy scheme. Again, similar to the approach that we're taking with the hydrogen buses, it's about encouraging change and enabling that change within the city. So that kind of wraps up the presentation. All of this information and more is available at brumburies.co.uk, and if you've not done already, I'd encourage everybody to go to brumburies.co.uk, follow the link to check whether or not your vehicle is subject to the daily charge, and we estimate that around about 3/4 of vehicles on the roads will not be subject to the daily charge. So that's really important. So check first. And if you are, if your vehicle is going to be subject to the daily fee, then look at the exemptions that are available and the financial incentives as well, because they are there to help you and to help the city get ready for the Clean Air Zone. And so that ends the presentation. Thank you.
Now, in our original invite, Councillor Bohr and I gave a whole list of references, websites on the council menu for people to go to, and one of them was how to check whether your vehicle is going to be liable to the charge. It's important that you do that. Now, you've had some written questions. Have you had a look at those, Stephen?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, there was a couple of questions that we got in before, so I'm just scrolling through them at the moment. So one of the questions we got was around controlled parking zones, I think in the St John's Reservoir Road area,
and also around the Middleway, or just outside.
Yeah, I think there's a wider point within the question around the potential impact through displacement of city centre workers using some of the side roads as parking, and it is something that we are conscious of. As I said before, we are, through the Clean Air Zone programme, we are introducing 2 new controlled parking zones, sort of over to the east of the side of the city, where there were some potential gaps within the existing controlled parking zone network. One of the other things we're monitoring closely as well is the perimeter of the Clean Air Zone, just to monitor the volumes of traffic and also the potential impacts on air quality in those areas. So it is something that we're definitely going to look at. I think one of the other things that we'd like to look at as well is just thinking about how those schemes work in a much more holistic manner, because they have grown up over time. And I know it's definitely something that both yourself, Councillor Hartley, and Councillor Bohr have challenged officers about before, is thinking about how those things can be harmonised much more effectively.
Indeed. Now, Albert, you wanted to say something.
I think I'd like to expand a little on what Stephen has just said, because this has been a major concern for us, Stephen, as councillors in Ladywood Ward, partly because we currently have problems in terms of city centre workers parking in the ward, and those problems have resulted over a few years now in the introduction of resident parking zones. One of those is outside the Middleway, but the others are inside the ring road. So there will be areas which are outside the ring road that are going to be affected without a shadow of a doubt. And we have in a sense, proof of that statement already, because last year a residence parking scheme was introduced in central Ladywood within the Ring Road. And as soon as that was introduced, there was a displacement outside of the Ring Road into the area, particularly off Icknield Port Road going through to Reservoir Road. And our view is that that will be exacerbated, if you like. That movement, which has already happened, will be exacerbated by the introduction of the clean air zone. And it's to that end, not only have we raised it with officers, as you correctly said, Stephen, we've also raised it, as you know, with the cabinet member. And I think it'd be fair to say that we have an understanding from the cabinet member that, and this is a policy decision, so to speak, that residence parking zones will undoubtedly have to be introduced where there is that consequential effect that I've just referred to. We have then asked, we've then gone on to ask the cabinet member how this could be put in place. And the reason for that question is obvious to you. It's about budget and making available the budget that would allow its introduction. And this is not a small amount of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds that would be needed in order to introduce a residence parking scheme. And so what we believe we have, Stephen, is an assurance that when monies become available, as you had on your PowerPoint presentation, as monies become available from the charging for non-exempt vehicles, that will be made available on a sort of priority order basis to those areas where parking is residence parking schemes are needed. So we've taken those steps already, we believe. I think we've put a market down for that area off Icknield Port Road, going through the St John's Estate and on beyond Reservoir Road. So I just want to make sure that residents who are listening in know that we've already put the marker down, because we anticipate there is going to be a knock-on effect in that area from city centre workers parking in the area of Ladywood outside the Middleway.
Now, the first question we had submitted before the meeting started was from Mr. Reid of Sefton Road. And I think, as I recall, his question touched upon this displacement and so on. Could you take a look at Mr. Reid's question and see if there are any gaps in what you've already provided for one that you discussed?
So I can see two questions. I think both of them are around displaced parking, aren't they? As you said, air, and I think there was a displaced traffic and pollution, air and noise. What will the council do to monitor damage to air quality? Will the councils pursue the residents' involvement, a low traffic neighbourhood scheme? Those sorts of things. So I think I've answered the question in terms of, well, as Councillor Bora said, but I think both of you have provided really strong challenge to the programme around the need to monitor very closely and take action to try and prevent this issue happening. So it's certainly something that's absolutely on our radar, and I think as well, like I said earlier, we've absolutely demonstrated the willingness to do that by the inclusion of, to start off with, two schemes, two additional resident parking schemes that have been funded through the implementation programme for the clean air zone. Obviously we need to take a view for anything else that comes through, or any additional requirements, because as Councillor Bohr said, the schemes do cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to implement, but we are, if needs, where there is a case, then we are prepared to look at that.
You see, it's just that our 20 mile an hour zone for St John's and the reservoir area, to my way of thinking, was really, provided that controlled parking zone would follow as soon as possible after its introduction.
Okay.
The two go together, to my way of thinking.
Yeah, and again, I think one of the real challenges with this is and again, both of you have provided some real challenge to officers around this, is not just thinking about individual schemes, it's absolutely thinking about the total impact of those things and linking those things and thinking through it holistically. And you know, and that's absolutely an area where we can get better. We have to get better.
Yeah, okay. Could I ask Mr. Reid just to type into chat if there's anything he feels hasn't been addressed? Now, we had a question asking whether the presentation would be made available to everybody, and we've had a confirmation that it will. And I would ask everybody to email that out or put it on your websites for your community groups and organisations and to your friends, that we can get the message across for people of Ladywood Ward. Now, there's another question here on motorcycles. Why were motorcycles excluded? Quite powerful and noisy.
No, I mean, that's a really good question. In part, it's to do with the volumes and the contribution to the challenge of air quality, and in part, it's to do with the emission standards. You know, I absolutely take on board the comment that they can be noisy, and you know, in some instances with some owners of the motorcycles, that there is a nuisance element, but that's not an air quality problem, which kind of goes against what I was talking before about trying to see these things holistically. But no, it is a combination of that. It is a combination of the contribution and also the emissions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions in the chat? Well, look, I could put one to you, which I think came in from someone who doesn't live within the ward, which will be of interest to some of our residents, about blue badge holders.
Mm-hmm.
And will they fare?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. That there is, as I said during the presentation, there is a permanent exemption in place for vehicles with a disabled passenger tax class. There is no exemption for blue badge holders, and part of that is that the blue badge can actually be transferred from vehicle to vehicle. And the other thing as well is, and this goes back to the point I was making about the disabled passenger tax class, is the vehicle can be, and I say this very, very carefully, can be upgraded relatively easy. I appreciate that isn't the case for a lot of people who have blue badge, who have blue badges, but yet there is no exemption in place for blue badge holders.
I recently emailed in the following scenario of an elderly woman with a terminal illness who lives just within the CAS, just within yards within the CAS zone, who is visited daily by an equally elderly brother who does her shopping and cleaning and keeps her company and so on. Are there any arrangements, special arrangements in for someone, because he has a very old car? It's changed over the years.
No, yeah, it's a really difficult question. The first thing I would start with is to not think about the age of the vehicle. Obviously, the age can be a determinant, but the first thing is to check first. Check if the vehicle does meet. You know, put it into the vehicle. Put the registration of the vehicle into the vehicle checker. Check. And we're encouraging people to check all the time as well, because we know that some people have, quite a few people have contacted us who have had a result and their vehicle comes up as being subject to the daily fee, but they put their same registration into the vehicle checker for London's ULEZ, which uses the same emission standards, and they get a different result saying that they don't have to pay. Now, we've challenged the DVLA around this, because ultimately it's the same sort of data that underpins to both of these systems. And they have been making changes to improve the accuracy of the data and more accurately reflect the emissions that these vehicles do apply to. So what we have seen over time is that some vehicles that were showing up as subject to the fee have actually become not subject to the fee. So we absolutely encourage people, if you've got a certain result, please check before we go live on the 1st of June, because we're constantly feeding back information about where we're getting these anomalies. The other thing I should stress though is that the two systems, the one for London and the one for Birmingham, are completely separate. We're using the same system as Bath as a vehicle checker, and we'll be using the same system as Manchester and Sheffield and Portsmouth, but it is different to ULEZ. And Transport for London will use slightly different rules because they've got slightly different exemptions working and discounts and various other things like that. So only use the vehicle checker for Birmingham to determine compliance. But going back to your question, it's a really difficult situation, and I know you've raised this with us, and my team are talking directly to this person just to understand what we may be able to do. On the face of it, there isn't an exemption that would work, but we're looking into those sorts of cases, and we're trying to work with those people to see what we may be able to do within the scheme. Okay, we're not creating exceptions for individual cases. We have to work within the rules of the scheme, just so it's fair for everybody.
See, there are exemptions in the controlled parking zone arrangements in parts of Ladywood. It just seems unfair.
No, I completely understand.
I mean, for everybody here, Albert and I, along with all the other councillors who represent wards within the Ladywood constituency, have been meeting regularly now about this clean air zone, trying to get the best for residents and businesses within our areas. And one success I feel is the 2-year period of exemption for people with elderly vehicles that they've loved and cherished in particular over the years. Those who live within the CAS zone to have a 2-year exemption from having to pay the charge. How is that going? Are people actually in Ladywood actually following up, making inquiries? And
yeah, it's been really interesting. We've the applications for exemptions opened. I think it was the 5th of March 2020, which was unfortunately 2 weeks before we went into lockdown. But so throughout up until around about October of last year, when we confirmed the launch date, we were getting a steady stream of applications coming through, and we were processing those and approving those. But since October, and more recently, actually, probably in the last month, we've seen a very, very steep increase in the volume of applications coming through, and we always expected that. It is inevitable that people, it only becomes urgent when people see an imminent deadline. So we've brought on additional staff to help us to deal with the volume of applications that we're getting through, and also the inquiries. We're also working with the council's contact centre to help manage the volume of inquiries that we're getting. And our aim is to ensure that every application for an exemption with supporting evidence that we receive by, I think it's the 10th of May, will be processed and will be ready for the 1st of June. Anything after the 10th of May, we can't guarantee that it will be ready for the 1st of June, but we will do our damnedest to make sure it is.
Really, people should be telling their friends and neighbours to get online and get things sorted. Yeah. Could somebody go online on behalf of somebody else, like an elderly neighbour?
Yeah,
or...
yeah. Sorry, councillor.
Yes, Steve, I know you've got what I'm about to request, because I've seen it before. You've got a slide which showed the progress of exemptions, or the application for exemptions. I wonder whether you can get that up and share it, because okay. I think it's a very good illustration of what you said. And if you put something on the screen, residents who are looking in will get a better idea of what it is you've just said from the graph.
Yeah. What I'll do is I will pull up the last dashboard report that we did, so that gives us a good demonstration. So if you just bear with me while I try and put that on my system.
I think what you said about not a cut-off as such, but hoping to progress everything that came in by a particular May date. I've just immediately forgotten what the date in May was.
10th.
10th of May. I think that's appropriate. because those who apply after that would realise, I would hope, that it takes a week or two or more perhaps to process these matters, and therefore you've got to have a cut-off date in terms of assuring people that their application for exemption will be processed.
Yeah, and it's from my perspective actually, and from the team that I have that work for me on this, it's been really interesting in terms of, okay, so I do actually have this presentation now, so if you just, I'll just share this pack. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. I'll just go into presentation mode just so everybody can see this. So this is a slide that we share regularly with a number of people, but the graph at the bottom left shows the volume of applications since since April of 2020. It goes back slightly further, obviously, as like I said, to the beginning of March, but this was April, and this goes through to the end of Feb. We're actually just about ready to do the next monthly update for the end of April, yeah. But what you can already see is that it was fairly flat through to around about October time, and then in October there's a definite increase, and then that volume has just continued to grow and grow and grow, and it's and what we've really seen over the last 2 weeks in particular is a real acceleration in the volume of applications coming through, and it's been really interesting. And one of the things that we keep saying to people is that if you supply all the evidence that we ask for as part of the application, we can process that pretty much within a week. And again, depending upon how many people we've got working on the processing of exemptions and things like that, we could almost do it in 24 or 48 hours, so long as we've got the evidence. That's why we're saying to people, if you submit an application before the 10th of May, you've got all the supporting evidence, we can guarantee you will get an approved exemption. But the other thing to stress is that we will continue to process exemptions after the 1st of June. You will still get up to 2 years from the 1st of June as an exemption. It will just be on a prorated basis for the remainder of those 24 months. But again, the really important thing is that one of the first qualifying criteria is that you have a vehicle that doesn't meet the emission standards. It would be subject to the daily fee, and that's the starting point, and that's where the exemptions start to kick in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a question about getting black cab drivers to change to electric.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's a very good question. So one of the things that we have done within the £15 million of grants that are available for Hackney Carriage and private hire drivers is that there is one of the schemes encourages is a grant towards the cost of a hybrid or an electric vehicle. And originally with the Hackney Carriage scheme, we included a grant towards the cost of an electric or ultra low emissions, or a zero emissions Hackney cab. And for a number of reasons, COVID being one of them, that there wasn't a huge amount of take up for that, and there is a cost barrier to overcome with them. Those vehicles can cost in the region of £50,000 or more. The Birmingham's licensing committee has changed the licensing deadline that helped to also drive that, and in line with that, and also reflecting some of the challenges around COVID, we've introduced an additional grant of £5,000 so that Hackney Carriage drivers can actually get a vehicle that is compliant with emission standards. It doesn't have to be ultra low. We would love them to adopt ultra low, but we also recognise that that's not always going to be achievable. But the other thing that one of the schemes that we're looking to roll out as soon as possible is a rent to buy scheme for electric Hackney carriages to help get into those vehicles. And as I said earlier, I think we're looking to purchase up to 50 taxis to go into that scheme. We'll want to procure a partner to help us to run that scheme, because we need expertise from the market. So yeah, so those are some of the things we're looking to do that.
It's a question, perhaps possibly as a follow-on from the motorcycle question, about tyre and brake pad emissions contributing to pollution.
Oh, okay.
Has helped reduce these.
Yeah, so I think the person posed the question is referring to particulates, and I mean that's a really good question. So the purpose of the clean air zone is specifically to address the levels of nitrogen dioxide, which are exhaust emissions, because they are at a number of locations. They are within the city centre. They are above the legal limit, so we have to take action to do something about that. But what we expect is that through the clean air zone, we will also help to reduce particulates. But we're also mindful that in the environment bill that's working its way through Parliament at the moment, the government is looking at the possibility of introducing a legal limit around particulates. And I know a number of organisations are lobbying the government around the adoption of the World Health Organization legal limit for particulates. So that's something we're monitoring quite closely. The council's position around that would be that we would certainly be keen to see that and how that would practically work, because inevitably the statutory requirement to enforce that will fall on the local authority, but we'd need the resources and the powers to be able to do something around that.
Okay. Any other questions, Pat? Oh, Albert.
Yes, I'll come in. Can I return to the issue of pollution, Steve? Now, a number of those viewing the forum tonight may not appreciate it, but there are in and around the Ladywood ward, there are a number of stations to measure pollutants. For example, there's one nearby to Nelson School.
Yeah, next door.
And so we have as a city, therefore, the means of, on a daily basis or a weekly basis, whatever it is, whatever rate they're monitored at, we have the means of determining what the level of pollutants are on a fairly fine footprint basis. Are you going to be putting out any information on what pollutant levels are just prior to the introduction of the clean air zone? And are you then going to put out figures on a regular basis following on from the introduction, just so that perhaps you can demonstrate, and I hope it will be, demonstrate a reduction in pollutants?
Yeah, thank you for flagging. Thank you for raising that. The city council alone has 90 plus air quality monitoring data collection points across the city. The greatest concentration of those is within the city centre, because that's where we've got the greatest challenges. We publish all of that data on an annual basis. There's a statutory requirement on the organisation to publish that data through an air quality annual status report, and I'm happy to provide the link to that if anybody wants it. We also publish the data through an interactive website that helps you to visualise some of that data, and it rates it red, amber, green, and you can actually see an improvement over time. And that's something we've always said, that the air quality is improving over time. The challenge that we've got is that because of the risk to human exposure from nitrogen dioxide, the challenge we've been set by the government is to do that in the shortest possible time, and the clean air zone helps us to achieve that. But we are absolutely committed to publishing the data. The challenge that we've got with air quality data immediately before we launch is that we've been through an exceptional year where traffic levels at the peak of the first lockdown were as low as 30% of normal levels.
Yeah.
So it gives us a false reading really for the last year. But what we plan to do is use 2019 as our as a near best, because we know that since with this second lockdown, that the traffic volumes have actually been higher than they were during the first lockdown. And in March, I think I said this earlier on, during March, we've seen traffic volumes across the whole of the network at around about 70% of pre-COVID levels. In the last week following the latest easing of the restrictions, that traffic volume has increased back to 90%. So as those restrictions are easing, we're rapidly getting back to 100%. But the overall impact across the last year is that it gives a skewed view of what the data is. So we're planning to use 2019 as our base.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just come back in, Stephen, if I may? I'm going to push you a little harder here, but for a very good reason.
No, go on.
You might have people around the city who doubt the necessity, if you like, to introduce the clean air zone. And many of those doubters perhaps will remain after its introduction. By showing a reduction in or an improvement in the quality of air, I think it helps assures those who believe in the introduction of the clean air zone. It assures them that it's been a worthwhile exercise, and it perhaps has the opportunity of bringing on side those who initially were doubters about its introduction. I know you've got a communications budget aligned to all of this. And I do think that you ought to be thinking about doing something at a reasonable point in time following on from the introduction of the clean air zone, doing something in communication terms which demonstrates what the effect has been. I think it's good PR. If nothing else, but I think it would provide assurances to residents, and it would perhaps bring on board those who previously had doubted it all.
Yeah, look, like I said, we're absolutely committed to publishing the data, and the approach that
it's how you publish it, though.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get
not
that.
Everybody is tech savvy or whatever,
No,
and I think you've got to use normal. I'd say much more resident friendly. Let me use that phrase: resident friendly communications.
Yeah.
Doing something through the press, for example, the media, to actually get the message across. This has been the reduction over the first month. This has been the reduction over the first 3 months. To do something like that, I think would be very, very helpful.
Now,
take that on board.
About 15 months ago, I actually went to the Birmingham University Geography Department, where a team actually has responsibility for collecting the data, and I actually saw a printout for the monitoring station next door to Nelson School. So that's pretty good to just be able to see that it's working. What we do, as Albert says, need something in basic language just to show any improvements, hopefully lots of improvements that come from the clean air scheme. Now, there's a further question about measuring air quality, and it's about measuring it, like say, for instance, I imagine along Monument Road, where traffic may be displaced at times, and the middleway gets pretty crowded at peak times now. So,
excuse me.
There may well be a detour attempted along Monument Road and so on.
Perhaps in answering that question about in measuring air quality in areas where traffic might be displaced, you might just point out, if you do know them, where the air monitoring stations are, if you like, in and in the vicinity of the middleway.
Okay.
There's one at Nelson School, or near to Nelson School. I can tell you of that one.
So okay. That's a tough question. so off the top of my head, I don't know the location of all 90
No, not asking
air
for
quality
that.
monitoring. No, but there are. So funny enough, I was actually looking at the map earlier today, just to figure out where they were in relation to Ladywood. So I know that we do have there are monitoring stations either on the middleway or just around the middleway. Those are our stations. Actually the other really important thing here is, and Councillor Hartley was talking about this, is that the council is not the only people that have monitoring stations out there. There is the university, and we work with them as part of the WM Air project. We are also contacted quite regularly, actually, by a number of organisations who are keen to roll out sensors using our street furniture. We've recently done a project with somebody who wanted to install air quality monitors on the poles for the ANPR cameras for the CAS as well. So I think it's something that we are definitely keen to do. We're also purchasing an additional 6 continuous analyzers to give us that continuous flow of data. The majority of the air quality data collection points we've got what are called diffusion tubes. So those adhere to a standard that's set down by DEFRA in terms of data collection around air pollutants. So those have to be they get collected on a monthly basis, and they're effectively a paper that just captures the pollutants on them. They get sent away to a lab for analysis. All that data is then taken through. But there is more that we can do, and we're also interested in the use of indicative sensors that tend to focus more on particulates rather than gaseous pollutants, which nitrogen dioxide is, because indicative sensors are really good tools for building engagement around the issue of poor air quality, especially with schools, and getting schools really involved in this, and that links into some of the things around safe school streets, 20 mile per hour, just because, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the young, the old, and people living in deprivation are those who suffer the worst from poor air quality.
Yes. Further questions are sneaking in here. We asked for the sharing of your presentations, and that should be with the entire Ward Forum invite list with a covering note. There is now a request whether you can share the link to the air quality report. Yeah,
happy to do that. Yep,
so,
all the data is publicly available.
What's hit them. If they've not attended, they'll know where on earth it's coming from. Okay. Now, a question on the A38, going right through the centre. What does that contribute to the whole pollution issue?
So actually, what we find is where we've got some of the greatest concentrations, or some of the highest readings above the legal limit for nitrogen dioxide are around that area. So there is a massive contribution, and a lot of that is due to the volume of traffic that's using those roads, and at times it becomes very congested, so it becomes very slow, stationary almost at times. That has a big contribution to the air quality challenge. So that's why it's a combination of volumes and the speed at which that traffic is moving.
Some of our fellow councillors on Birmingham City Council have suggested that we could do the same, have the same impact just by having living walls along the A38, the walls at either side of it, planting more greenery.
It's those sorts of options can contribute, but the real thing here is that what we're trying to do is tackle the source.
Yeah.
Green infrastructure helps to remove some of the pollutants from the air, but they don't tackle the source. Road traffic contributes 80% of the nitrogen dioxide that we get. So there's a clear there's a clear source that we can do something about. Again, we're not banning cars. We're absolutely not banning cars. This is about encouraging people to do something different. And again, some of the really biggest challenges that we've got are those really short journeys. I think 20, I can never quite get this stat right, but I think it's something like 25% of all road journeys in Birmingham are less than 1 mile. And on average,
more than that.
Oh, maybe it's more. Yeah, maybe it is an alarming number.
Yeah.
And again, we're not saying to people, leave the car at home, because if you have to take the kids to school and then go on to work and things like that, then there is a real need there. But once a week, maybe twice a week, think about leaving the car at home. Can you do something different? That all makes a contribution. Because the other thing as well is that whilst the daily fee will only apply to those vehicles that don't meet the emission standards, let's make no mistake, those vehicles that do meet the emission standards still make a contribution to poor air quality. It's just less of a contribution. So again, if we can encourage people to do something different, leave the car at home more often, then that all adds up. That all makes a massive benefit. So green infrastructure can play a contribution, but again, it doesn't tackle the source. I think the other real big challenge with green infrastructure is that within the guidelines we were set by the government, we had to have a really strong evidence base to prove that the actions we were bringing forward would deliver the desired result. And the desired result was to bring air quality to within the legal limit in the shortest possible time.
It is a government mandated measure.
We were under a government direction to take action.
Yeah. Okay, and they've approved it.
Yeah, and the government approved the business case that we submitted to them. They've provided us with the funding that supports the implementation of the scheme.
Not as much as we needed, because we wanted money to install CPZs to protect everybody within the cars and around the outer rim of the middleway.
We did bid for more money. The other thing is that the government provides 3 important services. They provide the vehicle checker that we use as part of the clean air zone. They provide the payment portal, and they provide a national contact centre as well. So that's the first line there, really. So absolutely, the government is completely behind this. Okay.
As a further question, how was it determined that £30,000 was a cap and not some other amount, as each household has got its own financial constraints?
No, that's a really good question, actually. And what we looked at was the median weekly income in Birmingham. And we worked really closely with the NHS around this, actually, because one of the things we were trying to focus on was ensuring that key workers wouldn't be unnecessarily disadvantaged by this. And I think the calculation that we came out at was, I think the weekly median income was around £560–600 or something like that per week. And when you work that up, that worked out at 29,580. I'm sure Councillor Ball will correct my maths. But it's in that sort of ballpark. So we set it slightly higher at 30,000. It's a threshold. It is based on some evidence that we had at the time. There will always be people who are just over that threshold. We absolutely understand that. And if what we've always said is that we will monitor the impact of the scheme, and if we have to take a corrective action because certain groups are being unfairly disadvantaged, then we'll look at that.
Okay, thank you. Now, you partly answered this about what you're going to do with the raised funds from the fines, that it's all got to go back into the transport system, i.e. we will use it for controlled parking zones. But I heard, Councillor Bohr and I heard a few weeks ago that the government is now saying it wants to cut from those fines paid over to the Birmingham cars. How much and why?
That's a thank you for that question. So what I was just talking about before, there's 3 services that the government provides for the operation of a clean air zone, and they'll be provided to all cities that are delivering clean air zones within this program. So those are the vehicle checker, a payment portal, and the National Contact Centre. When Birmingham submitted its business case, there was a financial model, a 10-year financial model that was part of that business case. There was an assumed rate of cost recovery by the government for the central services of 5% of the income generated. The government has since adjusted its position on that and is now seeking to reclaim somewhere in the region of 16% of overall income. And that's before we take out operational costs. So this is almost on top of operational costs. And I think over the lifetime of that we're forecasting at the moment, it amounts to something like £17 million. It's a £2 per transaction fee.
Okay, there's a question about pollution levels actually on the ring road itself, and don't Councillor Bohr and myself just know it. There are lots and lots of seriously densely built residential developments around that middle way. So gone on in recent years and are yet to come. What about the pollution levels around there with new buildings going up and the existing?
So that kind of goes back to the point we were talking earlier about the need for additional monitoring, traffic volume monitoring. So we're putting in additional sensors because again, one of the things that we just want to track really closely is the potential for the displacement of traffic around the ring road, and one of the unintended consequences could be additional congestion. We don't think that necessarily will be a problem because we think there will be a reduced volume of traffic, but again, we wanted to monitor that really closely. The other area that we want to monitor really closely is potential additional air quality issues around the ring road. So that's where we're going to prioritise the location of the additional air quality, the continuous air quality sensors that we're installing will be around that area around the ring road. So we're capturing that information.
Right, now I don't know whether it's the same anonymous or another anonymous, but once it's up and running, once implemented and successful in the city centre, within the CAS, could the monitoring stations be moved into residential streets?
So are we talking about the air quality monitoring stations?
I imagine so. Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, they could potentially be. One of the things that we published, I think it was the end of March, was the updated air quality action plan. So we published those on a sort of a 5-year cycle, and it was and this year was the year to publish an updated one. In previous ones, we had actually highlighted the potential opportunity for introducing some kind of, not necessarily, we didn't call it a clean air zone at the time, but it was described as some kind of zone where you take targeted action to improve the levels of nitrogen dioxide. Needless to say that the clean air zone is part of the updated plan. What we've also identified actually is that need to monitor the potential displacement of air pollution from the area within the clean air zone to the areas around it, and we've set out a way of being able to prioritise areas where we would put additional monitoring. So yeah, I'm happy to share the link to that as well if people would like to read that.
Okay, well that's another thing for us to share then, Leslie and Pat, with all the unsuspecting people on our invite list. Another anonymous here. I don't know if it's the same person. How can you stop areas and the cars becoming car parks for commuters? How would that work?
So you kind of broke up a little bit there.
Parking, I think, don't we?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to the question we sort of started with, really, around the potential risk of displaced parking, people trying to avoid the daily fee by parking on the areas around. So as we've all described, through the Clean Air Zone program, we're already introducing 2 additional residential parking schemes, and we have said that we will also closely monitor parking around, especially around the boundary, and if we need to take action, we will.
Okay, as a question about diesel buses, well, they were banned in the core city centre from 2012 when the first partnership came in, which meant buses had to be of a certain level, and that was then expanded out to the middleway, wasn't it? I know Sandwell, my colleagues in Sandwell often complain they seem to be getting all the horrible buses. Well, lots of the routes actually that affect us in Birmingham actually come out of the city centre, so they would have to comply, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
and
they do.
New cross city services and the sprints which will spread across the city.
Yep.
Ultimately, I know NX are after being, zero carbon neutral.
Yeah.
But it's in 2030 now.
I think it is. Yeah, I think that the National Express West Midlands, we talked to them a lot, obviously, because of the size of their fleet, and they've made some really strong commitments. One of the things they've said is that by the time the zone comes in, I think they've committed to all of their vehicles being Euro 6 compliant. Yeah. They've also, because what they've done is they've retrofitted a lot of the vehicles, so they've applied kits to ensure that the emissions coming out of the exhaust comply with the emission standards. They've also invested heavily in hybrid buses as well. And as I said earlier, we've supported some of that sort of, I suppose, fleet upgrade by purchasing 20 hydrogen buses. Those are due to come. Those are due to come into service very shortly. I think it's around about June, July time. And I think National Express West Midlands have also said that, I can't remember exactly what the year was, but from a certain point they will only purchase zero emission vehicles. So there's some really strong commitments there from them to ensuring that their vehicles are fit with what we're trying to achieve as a city, because this isn't just the council's job on its own.
Also, with Coventry having won the one of the 2 all-electric bus city schemes from the government, it will mean that National Express will move their extensive fleet of hybrids and low-carbon vehicles into other parts of the region. Hopefully that will include Birmingham as well. There's a follow-up question on the blue badge holders matter, which we touched upon earlier. Why aren't they being offered any kind of concession? People with disabilities are much more likely to be living on low incomes and unable to replace their older cars, not being able to afford to go into the centre to shop, visit theatres and galleries would be detrimental to them. Or there's more to their mental health and increased isolation. Even being able to go into the centre without being charged 2 or 3 times per month would make a huge difference to them. Will this be considered?
So I think the thing that I would stress first of all is that the first thing to check is whether or not the vehicle that's owned by the blue badge holder meets the emission standards, because like I say, around about 3/4 of all the vehicles on the roads will not be subject to the fee. Yeah, that's the first thing to stress. I think the other thing is that if you're a resident within the clean air zone and you're a blue badge holder, you qualify for a residence exemption. Now that's not going to fit. That's not going to suit everybody, and I think that's really one of the real challenges here with the scheme of exemptions and financial support. There was a very long list of potential exemptions, and those have all been published through the full business case. But one of the challenges that the team had really in landing on the list that we did end up with was trying to avoid duplication. But also having a scheme that was also that could be administered in terms of evidence and how, and the benefits gained and things like that. So no, I absolutely hear what the concern raised by the person on the call. But yeah, there is no exemption for blue badge holders at the moment. But if you're a resident, then you can get an exemption.
Yes, and we just see whether they are, whether they are going to be liable to a charge. Another anonymous person, hope it's not the same one. Perhaps we just ought to meet in a cafe once the virus is gone. Instead of a CPZ, could funds be used to implement low traffic neighbourhoods where residents request them? Are the two mutually exclusive?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think it's also fair to say that low traffic neighbourhoods, as many supporters there are a number of people that are against them as well. So we as a council, we're supporting the test of 2 low traffic neighbourhoods at the moment. One's in Lozells, one's in Kings Heath, and what we're just trying to do is explore just how they work, the benefits they bring, because this is a relatively untried area.
Okay, and a question on 20-mile-an-hour zones. They've proven to reduce emissions, particularly when with diesel cars. Might there be a programme to improve the current levels of enforcement of this limit in Ladywood? I mean, we have large areas of 20-mile-an-hour limits, and now the new one around St John's and the reservoir. Are we going to enforce this any day soon?
So obviously the enforcement sits with the police, but it's certainly something that I can take away and talk to some of my colleagues within the transport team and their links that they have with the police, and we can certainly take that away and ask them to explore that with them. Right.
I'm looking for further questions. Some seem to have disappeared quite suddenly. Is that
they switched from the new heading onto the publish heading, Kath, so you've got to move from one heading to another on your screen.
Right. Well, oh yes.
But you've taken all the questions that are currently in.
Here we go. Oh yeah. I've hit them all, have I? Okay. Are there any further questions that anyone would like to ask? I mean, this isn't the be all and end of all of it. I think we'll be revisiting it when we can meet live and assess just what's happening. Good, perhaps even negative for people living here. Stephen.
Sorry, yeah, just to add to that, actually, my team are regularly running webinars almost every week, at least. So at the moment we've got a very active program, because it's a little bit frustrating that we can't actually go out and meet people face to face, which would be our desired approach, which as I'm sure it's yours. But to help share the message and answer questions, really, and this is, these kinds of sessions are really helpful. The team is running a series of webinars. They're focused on particular groups, so residents, workers, businesses, and they're split into those sort of 3 groups. But all that information is available on the Brumbreathes website, so brumbreathes.co.uk. I'd encourage everybody to go there. You can also sign up to a monthly newsletter as well that talks about the things that the city is doing in preparation for the launch.
And this is all information that Albert and I put into our original invite. There's another request that to share the link to the air quality report that's come in very recently again. Anything else? No? Are there any other questions, people? We're coming up to the 8 o'clock watershed. Anything? Anybody there? Of course I can't hear you, can I? Well, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I must say then, thank you everybody for attending, and for Steve to coming to explain it all to us, and Leslie and Pat for getting us all organised and involved. Albert, did you want to add something?
I think I would just like to comment on the things forum. I think by choosing a single topic, we've been able to focus in on issues in a very good way here, and I hope those residents who have come in on the forum would agree with that. And perhaps where there's a big issue like the clean air zone, we might come back and try and repeat this, Kath. Even when we go back to the real world, so to speak, and a lot of this virtual world disappears. Because actually we've got a medium here which could be used quite successfully, focused in on big topics which lots of residents might be concerned about.
Yes, we have been having Zoom meetings and Teams meetings with groups around the ward really since last summer on particular issues within their neighbourhood or street. And although we've not been allowed to have councillors' advice bureaus, I'd say that the emailed inquiries have more than made up for not having them, and letters and telephone calls and everything. Not really on the cars as yet, though I think that will build. But so it's always better to meet people face to face. I do prefer that, but nonetheless, I think people have risen to the challenge and kept us on our toes throughout. So thank you for that. I hope everybody who's attended has learnt something and will take all the information out to their friends and neighbours. And I wish the cars every success. Now, we have a meeting of our working group of Ladywood constituency councillors on Friday. So we'll be taking more information about how many expressions of interest and applications have been coming in. And I would hope to see that increase as we get closer to the 10th of May, isn't it, really? We're getting your applications in. So everybody check your vehicle and take appropriate action. If you think you should be exempt for whatever reason, it's worth that inquiring to find out where you stand. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Oops.